The views and opinions expressed here on Wrestling Winedown are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any other agency, organization, employer, or company. What's up, guys? It's Lo, and you are tuned in to Wrestling Winedown, a female-founded and hosted podcast dedicated to professional wrestling and our favorite adult beverage. We are back for the 10th episode in our exclusive series, The Life of a Wrestling Fan, where we talk to individuals with awesome careers who also happen to be professional wrestling fans. On this episode, I am joined by a very familiar face to the Wrestling Winedown community. Vanessa Gueverra is a valuation manager at one of the most notable online marketplaces to buy and sell luxury goods. When Vanessa isn't evaluating Gucci, Louis, Fendi, Prada, Word to Creation, you can find her watching wrestling or even modeling some of our merch. Vanessa is spilling the wine on her love of wrestling, including a core memory of meeting Eddie Guerrero at the Space Needle as a child, as well as what has kept her interested in professional wrestling and how her love has expanded to independent wrestling over the years. Vanessa is also spilling the wine on her amazing career, including how she was able to get into the fashion industry, what a normal day in her career looks like, if she's been able to intertwine her love of wrestling in her career at any point, and of course, who she finds to be the most fashionable in professional wrestling currently. And you know I can't let Nessa come on this podcast without asking her about styling a wrestling outfit for either a show or a convention. I love to put together outfits. She loves to put together outfits. You have to hear what some of her signature pieces are and what she's currently on the hunt for. So grab your favorite glass of bubbly. We're going in for the 3 count. We are back with another episode of Wrestling Winedown, and this is part of our series, The Life of a Wrestling Fan, where we talk to individuals with awesome careers who also happen to be professional wrestling fans. I am joined by a familiar face. I feel like she's almost like the Wrestling Winedown model. When you see a collection coming out, you're like, is Nessa going to model it?
You already know. I'm like the Fashion Nova model, but for Wrestling Winedown.
Nessa Gueverra, welcome to Wrestling Winedown. How are you? Look at her. She has on her Winedown.
This is my favorite shirt. I'm so excited to do this with you. I am probably the least interesting person you're going to have on here. You have some cool guests on here. Like, you had a lawyer, you've had a cake decorator, people who do like wrestling magazines. They're so cool. And then there's like me.
Miss Ma'am, you are out here showing people how to tell if a Louis is fake.
Yeah,
not everyone can do that.
I feel like no one in this community cares about things like that.
I do.
Oh, okay. Well, you're all
the girlies do. The girlies do. The high-end luxury girlies.
There's not that many in the community, but there are a good amount, I feel like.
There are. When did you first become a professional wrestling fan?
So, it's kind of hard to answer that because my mom was a huge fan her entire life. She watched in like the 80s. She watched in the 90s. She really loved like Macho Man, Roddy Piper, Jake the Snake. So I feel like it was always a part of my childhood and like growing up. But I think when I don't know, like fully came into consciousness and I was like, oh, I actually really like this. I was 8 years old. My mom turned on SmackDown one night and I saw Trish and Lita and I was just sold from there. They were the coolest looking women that I've ever seen. And I followed their feuds. I was so invested in everything that they did. Lita and the Hardys, and then Trish Stratus's feuds with Victoria, Jazz, Mickie James, Molly Holly. It was the most interesting thing to like 8-year-old Vanessa. So yeah, I think it's always been a little bit part of my life, but it was Trish and Lita that really brought me in.
What does your mom think now that you're an adult and you still like wrestling? Does she still watch?
No, she doesn't. And she thinks it's so funny. I told her that, I went to Philly earlier this year for WrestleMania. And she's like, you still do that? Mind you, she took me to my first WrestleMania 19 in Seattle. So I'm like, you're the reason why I'm so into this. But no, she thinks it's so strange that I'm still into it.
Mom, it's not a phase.
It was never a phase. It was never a phase. I think she thought it was, but it never was.
What has kept you interested in wrestling?
That's a good question. I actually just watched your last episode with Meg, and she said it in a way that I feel like I could never fully articulate, or at least as well as she did. But the women have really been what's kept me interested in wrestling for so long. I mean, obviously Trish Stratus and Lita were my gateway into being a wrestling fan. And I will say I have taken so many breaks from wrestling, some of those breaks spanning several years. But it was always the women that brought me back into watching wrestling, whether it was Total Divas airing on E or finding out who Sasha Banks and Bayley were. Anytime I took a break, it was always the women that brought me in. I started watching at a time where most of the women's matches were either like bra and panties matches or like the mud matches. And from that, and then them having like real matches that weren't even 2 minutes long. So seeing that progress made over the last few years has really kept my interest going. You know, they have like these really like raunchy, scandalous, super like 90s, 2000s type of storylines where it felt like women weren't getting the respect that I felt like they deserved, which honestly had turned me off so many different times to wrestling. It was almost like no matter what was on the main card, there was nothing that was big enough to draw me back into it if the women weren't getting the shine that they deserved. But today, you know, we see, again, Meg really said it so eloquently. We have so many ways to go. And as much progress as we've made with all of the allegations that have been going on, there's still so much growth that can be made and so much more progress the women can experience. I think that women should always be protected in whatever space they're in. And even if they're getting the big matches and the main events, to me, that doesn't matter if they're not being taken care of behind the scenes. It feels almost fake. So I guess just watching and hoping that the women continue to get respect in this space.
You said it eloquently as well. You You mentioned Trish and Lita as some of your favorites when you first start watching wrestling. Who are a couple others that you enjoyed watching versus who you enjoy watching now?
That's such a fun question because I feel like my taste in wrestling has changed so much over the years. Growing up, I'm going to say Lita and Trish forever because they're the reasons why I even got into this thing. But I loved Jazz growing up. She was just so badass. I just like never seen any woman like Jazz before. Victoria was also a favorite. Molly Holly, like these women, like they weren't stereotypically the models, you know, but they were still so gorgeous and so cool and doing things like all of Trish's hardcore matches. Oh my God. I was just like, I've never seen like women do this before. And it was so cool to see them do that. So growing up, you know, all the women really, I'll give all of them their flowers from Jacqueline, Jazz, even like Terry Runnels. And, you know, these are the women that I grew up watching. And I hope that they are able to know what they've contributed to today's wrestling landscape for women. But I also like Eddie Guerrero is my all-time favorite. John Cena, Rey Mysterio, Stone Cold. Those are the wrestlers that I like love to watch growing up. But currently, you know, I still love the mainstream wrestlers. I love Seth Rollins. I love Roman Reigns, Mercedes, Naomi, Bianca. I love watching all of them, but I can't talk about the wrestling that I love now without talking about indie wrestling. I feel like indie wrestling has completely shaped the way that I feel and the way that I watch wrestling. If you know me, which you do, and whoever follows me probably knows this too, I love West Coast Pro. I love Prestige Wrestling. I think they just put on such high caliber of matches. I love watching like Kevin Blackwood, Titus Alexander, Starboy Charlie, Alpha Zoe, Johnny Robbie, and Los Suavecitos. Like they're just so fun to watch. And I'm so lucky that I have West Coast Pro in my backyard. And then also just being part of wrestling Twitter for as long as I have and seeing the girls go out there and start wrestling from Mariah May, hello, Alexis Littlefoot, Emily J, Maya World. Like there's just, it's so cool to see them, you know, as like stans, like going out and like living their dreams and, you know, seeing them get signed to these bigger companies. Jacob Fatu is a great example. So for me, like I love indie wrestling. And I think it's so cool to see something that was so small turn into something as big as it is now. It's so fun to watch. And I'm so glad that there is wrestling for everybody nowadays. Kind of going back to your question, I still love the mainstream, but the indie wrestling is like what I'm so hooked onto right now.
You have a picture that you post every so often on Twitter and Instagram of you and Eddie Guerrero. How did that happen?
Oh my gosh, I will post that till the end of days. I mentioned earlier, my mom took me to my first WrestleMania in Seattle. We were in Seattle and it was just kind of kismet. It was my first time going, this was my first wrestling show, mind you. My first wrestling show.
Amazing.
WrestleMania 19. This is my favorite story ever. Me and my mom and her boyfriend at that time, his favorite wrestler, my mom's boyfriend, was Eddie Guerrero because of the lowriders and the muscle cars. And he was really big into cars. I'm not. I don't know anything about that, but he was super into it. And so that was his favorite. And we got into line to go into the Space Needle thing in Seattle. I remember getting in line and I like turn around and literally right behind me is Eddie Guerrero and his family. I'm like, oh my God, what the is happening right now? And I'm 10 years old, I think, at that time. I have no social skills. I don't know how to talk to people or celebrities. I've never met anyone like that. But luckily, my mom's boyfriend just striked up like a conversation with him. They started talking about cars. They didn't even talk about wrestling at all. They were just like, oh man, like the car that you came out with last week. And I was just like watching in awe. I was like, oh my God, like I'm right next to Eddie Guerrero. And it was just like the coolest moment. I was so starstruck. I wish I could go back and like say how much he means to me. But we were in line the entire time through the Space Needle. We rode up the elevator together. We grabbed some food together. It was just the coolest moment. People were coming up to him, asking him for pictures. But after you take a picture, he would like turn back around and like have a conversation with us. And it was just the coolest thing ever. He was with his family, Vicky and his kids. And my mom made a joke because when I was like growing up, I wanted to be a wrestler. And she was like, oh yeah, she wants to be a wrestler. And Eddie Guerrero, like the thing that I will never forget, he was like, well, you can do whatever you want to set your mind to. And I live with that every day. I think it was just the most touching moment. And I'm so lucky that I got to meet Eddie Guerrero before his passing, and also him being my favorite wrestler of all time. It was just, it's my favorite story. It's my favorite like wrestling story.
You also mentioned indie wrestling. How did you find indie wrestling? Was it after you started kind of watching the mainstream stuff that you started looking into the independents in your area?
Oh my God. Yeah. It was like way after. I was in college at the time. I'm not going to say when because that would age me. But I was in college and I was just kind of getting back into wrestling. I had just taken one of my breaks from watching, and I was finding out about like Sasha Banks and Bailey and Seth Rollins and Dean Ambrose / John Moxley. And I was like, who, like, where did you guys come from? And I started looking into like their history and like where they wrestled before. And I was just like, oh, this is cool. I wonder if there's anything like this in California or near me. And I remember looking up, I don't even remember what I looked up. I think I had wrestling in the Bay Area, and All Pro Wrestling popped up, and I saw that they did shows and that there was one coming up like right around the corner. At the time I was on Wrestling Tumblr. So very OG. I was part of Wrestling Tumblr. I had some like wrestling friends on there that were also from the Bay Area. So we all met up at the show, and dude, it like blew my mind away. Prior to that, I'd only gone to WWE shows and never really good seats either. So we were always like all the way in the back. But at this indie show, I had like front row seat. And it was like, I've never seen anything like it. Tommaso Ciampa like came out and he had this fur boa and he like put it around me. It was just so wild. I was just like, this is crazy. I'm like right in front of the action. And from there, I was just going to every show that I could and starting to get more and more familiar with the people on the roster, following them on social media, seeing what they were up to. And yeah, so I've been a fan of indie wrestling for almost like a decade now, probably.
Let's talk about your career. Along with being a wrestling fan, you are in the fashion field, specifically in handbags. Yeah. When did you know that you wanted to pursue fashion as a profession?
I didn't. I really didn't. Like, not at all. It's funny because I feel like now most people, if they know me on social media, it's because like my outfits or like my fashion or what I do. And it's so funny because maybe up until like 2 years ago, I don't think anyone would have ever really called me fashionable. So it wasn't something that was ever on my radar. I went to school for communications. I wanted to do public relations. Once I took a few courses, I was like, I don't want to do this. And it led me to social media marketing. And that was something that I really wanted to do. But after graduation, and I live in the Bay Area, it was so competitive finding a job, especially around that time that I graduated. Again, I'm not going to date myself, but it was like the boom of social media. It was so hard, like the start of Instagram, this, Facebook was really popular at the time. Finding any job in the tech industry in the Bay Area was near impossible. I did social media marketing for like a small nonprofit in Oakland. I did social media marketing for a Pilates studio and just so many like random odd jobs. And I somehow landed working in digital loans, like finance. I don't know how I ended up there, but It was the most miserable time of my life. It was so stressful. I hated that job so much. I ended up hitting up one of my homegirls and I was just like, hey, is your job hiring? Mind you, I had no idea where she worked, what she did. But every time I looked at her Snapchat story at that time, I was like, she's never at work. I was like, she looks like she's having a blast every day. So I hit her up and I was like, hey, are you guys hiring? And she said, yes. So I applied, did a little bit of research of the company. And I told myself, Vanessa, you are going to be here for 6 months to a year, maybe. After that, you're going to move on and find something else. I started and it was a warehouse. It was like the most entry level position that you can think of. I was opening boxes, pulling things out, taking pictures, doing a little bit of data entry, and that was it. But the thing that I guess like really blew my mind was just all of the designer that was there. It was like Louis Vuitton, Gucci, Chanel, Hermes, things that I've never even heard of before. Things that like I could only afford in my, like I didn't grow up with money. I grew up very poor, honestly. So like seeing and being around these things, I was just like, my world expanded a little bit more. And I was just so curious and so intrigued. I was like, I think I can make a career out of this. So I just did a lot of like independent research, fell down many Reddit rabbit holes, and one thing led to another. I started getting promoted here and there. I was just so passionate about learning, like, where the do these fake handbags come from? Like, who's making it? How much are people spending on these handbags? I did so many Reddit deep dives and rabbit holes and just started to learn how to authenticate and got promoted. And now I'm here and it's been a wild ride, but I have a lot of fun working in the like secondhand luxury market.
What was the process like of pursuing fashion as a career? I know you mentioned you kind of fell into it, but progressing up, how has that kind of gone? Did you have to take any courses on the side? Was it mainly you just doing research? How did you move up in that career, going from a warehouse associate basically to a valuation manager?
Yeah, so it's so funny because after that warehouse position, I did get promoted to a copywriter. Basically, I was just doing the little descriptions of whatever we were listing onto the website. We had a department that was high risk authentication. And high risk authentication, basically whatever was expensive was going through that department. Those were like the Hermes handbags that were over $10,000, the Chanel handbags. In my head, I was like, how the hell do people know how to do this? It's not something that you can just take a course on. It's all hands-on experience that you have to have in order to learn. There's no like certificate that you have to get. There's no like complete 10,000 hours and you're a handbag expert. I didn't really know how people did any of this. As I was in the copywriting department, a position opened up in high risk authentication. And I was like, it, let me apply. I went in and I did the interview and I literally was like, I don't know how to do any of this. I don't know how to authenticate. I don't have any experience in authenticating, but I want to learn. I want to know I'm a student at heart. I want to learn as much as I can. So I laid it on the line. I said, I don't know how to do any of this, but I'm willing to learn and I'm passionate about it and I'll do what it takes to learn. And out of all the people that applied for that role, I ended up getting it. One of my favorite quotes is, and it's such a cliche, one of my favorite quotes is, if you're the smartest person in a room, you're in the wrong room. I feel like it is so important to be humble and want to know that you're not going to know everything and be content with that. And I think going in with that mindset really impressed the people that were interviewing me. And, I held up my end of that. I found new ways to authenticate that they hadn't done before. I introduced the concept of what was a super fake and where these factories are and who makes them. And I came in right at a time where I felt like we were all still learning how to authenticate. So I felt like I really helped expand the idea of what it means to authenticate. So I think it's just, wanting and be willing to learn is how I got as far as I have.
So like you mentioned, you've climbed up this ladder. You're now a valuation manager at one of the most notable online marketplaces to buy and sell luxury goods. How has this experience as a valuation manager treated you?
You know what? It's been pretty good, I'd say. I feel like I am kind of like I said, I think I got in at the right time for it, where all of us were still learning. There were so many things that we didn't know about the replica industry and the world and things like that. So to me, and I'm a brown woman going into an industry that has been predominantly white women and men. And to me, I've been in the company for 6 years. I started in the warehouse. I started opening boxes. And for me, I think I am so touched that they've been able to invest in me in the way that they had, provided the trainings that it needed for me to learn how to look at handbags, the construction, the design of items. I think it is just, it's not something that I feel like I see often, especially in these bigger corporations where if there is a position that's opening, oftentimes they hire externally or they promote a white person.
Yeah.
And all of my colleagues are Black, brown, queer people. So it is nice to see a company, especially as big as ours is. It's so nice to see them invest back into their employees, especially the ones that look like me or, have darker skin features than me or have queer identities or non-binary identities. I am very thankful to have as much growth as I've had especially in fashion. I'm a short, thicker brown girl. I'm such like the antithesis of what someone in fashion looks like. So it's treated me well, I'll say.
Take us through a normal day in your career. What does it look like? I see you post photos all the time of different bags, different brands, and I'm like, what is she doing over there?
So my day is never really the same. It's different. So for the most part, like my main to do is host appointments. Really, basically, we have clients who come in who are maybe interested in selling their handbags to us. I do a little bit of authentication with the handbags, make sure that it's real, first of all. And then I also have to explain the way that our pricing works. My main focus from high risk authentication was the authentication part. Now, as a valuation manager, it's all about how can we make this company the most money that we can. I have to be extremely knowledgeable of what the hell's happening in the economy. What does the market look like currently? What's trending? What's not trending? So when I do have these appointments, basically explaining that to these clients, letting them know how much they can make off of their handbags. On the days where I don't have appointments and it's just me in my office, I'm answering emails in terms of people who have questions about our pricing methodology. I have virtual meetings with other valuation managers across the country where we look at something called velocity, not to get too much into it, but how long are our items taking to sell on our website? At what price points? Again, like what's trending? What are people buying right now? We enter those discussions, like are vintage items hot right now? What size of handbags are hot right now? So we kind of just have virtual meetings throughout the day. And then sometimes I still have, I guess, my connection to high risk authentication. We'll do meetings with them from time to time to what should we be looking out for these handbags? Are there any new developments with these replica handbags that we should be keeping an eye out for? So it's just a lot of meetings, pricing handbags, doing some authentication. But my day-to-day is really, it's so different, but it's fun. It keeps me on my toes. So I'm either doing appointments with clients and giving them information about how the secondhand industry works, or I'm in meetings with my other colleagues just talking about what's trending, essentially.
Has your job become harder with DHGate coming in the mix? I know it's become a huge thing on TikTok, people going on there and buying discounted Louis, Fendi, all of the different luxury items. Has it made your job harder?
No, honestly, it makes it easier. The more fakes that we see come into our space, to me, the easier it is. The DHGate fakes aren't as good as I think people think they are. Whenever I see those TikToks, I'm like, oh, I could tell. I could tell as soon as they come out. The real tea is, I'm going to be exposing the industry. Rep ladies on Reddit. That is where people will post pictures of things that they purchased overseas. They'll take pictures comparing the item to their real handbags. And I'm like, damn, I could barely tell from these photos. So there are these sellers in China, and they have like these factories. They have different terms. They have like mirror quality, which is like the most exact handbag that you could get, 1-1, which I think is also quite up there. They have like 4A, 3A, and that's kind of like the tiers for the how exact handbags are. Most of the handbags that people get on DHGate are going to be that 3A quality, so kind of like right in the middle. They might use real leather, but their fonts might be different. They might not include date codes or stamp codes or production codes. DHGate is funny because we do see a lot of those types of handbags, but it makes it easier, I think, because I'm like, oh, that's what it looks
Is it almost offensive, though, when someone brings in their DHGate bag thinking they're going to pull a fast one on you guys, basically?
Oh, all the time, all the time. But I guess this is where it's a little hard because I think we have some people who just genuinely don't know. Someone who might have gotten scammed from like Facebook
Mm.
Marketplace or Poshmark, and they come in and maybe they've used it for a year or two, and then they're like, oh, I'm like ready to move on from it, and I'm like, girl, this is real. But I can kind of tell like who has like malintent versus someone who genuinely like doesn't know.
Mhm.
But it is kind of offensive when some people are like, I got it as a gift. And I'm like, well, you got to return it, or you got to tell them that.
What an awkward
Oh my
conversation.
God, it's the most awkward conversation to have. But I've done it so many times that I'm just like, girl, this is real. But no. I kind of, to like answer your question, it is kind of offensive. But I will say there are a lot of people who I think just genuinely didn't know.
Yeah. Have you been able to intertwine your love of wrestling in your career at any point?
You know what? I haven't actually, and I kind of like to keep the two separated.
Hmm.
My real life outside of the IWC is my career. It reminds me that there is real life outside and reminds me to go and touch grass and that there's so much more to life than whatever's happening online. So I do like to keep the two separated, but I do feel like my career has developed such like it helped me develop such a sense of my own personal style that I love posting like my outfits online. I like what I put together, and I think I do genuinely have pretty good taste. And it's funny because some outfits that I'll post, there have been some women's wrestlers who've like DM'd me and they're like, hey, like, where did you get those boots from? Or can you help me find something similar? Or sometimes they'll even send me like links to things and they're like, hey, do you think this is cool? And it's so funny because I'm like, I wouldn't know any of this if it weren't for my job, my real life
Hmm.
career. So even though I haven't been able to like intertwine the two together, I feel like it's helped me create bonds with people, whether they're like wrestlers or fans or women who are just like, I love your outfit. Where did you get X, Y, and Z? So even though I've kept the two separate, like I feel like there's still a little bit of a crossover.
I'm just glad you don't gatekeep because a lot of people who know how to dress, they
Oh my
gatekeep.
God. No, never. We don't gatekeep. There are some things that I will gatekeep, but for the most part, yeah, ask me anything. I love talking about like where I get my things. So I love sharing all that information.
When you're watching wrestling, do you feel like you tend to focus on the fashion due to your professional background?
Oh my gosh, I totally do. Like more so now than ever before. I feel like fashion in wrestling is such an underrated storytelling device. The first example that comes to mind is actually Daniel Garcia, especially with joining and like leaving the JAS, how he went from, like the trunks to the pants to the Prada sunglasses to the Kangol hat, and then going back to the trunks. I feel like it's so indicative of his character's journey and the character development. Another example that comes to mind is Rhea Ripley, the Raw after SummerSlam. She went from having like the black and purple makeup to black and red, and I thought that was such like a fun little touch. I mean, even like The Rock and his silk Versace shirts when he went all Hollywood, the Bellas separating and they each got their own gear. I think it's so good in storytelling when you see that change in their character. So for me, it's something that I pay close attention to. But even if it's not used in storytelling and, the gear is just made as like an homage to other wrestlers or to pop culture, I think it's so fun too. Like my favorite gear of all time is Sasha Banks at WrestleMania 32 in her Eddie Guerrero gear.
Hmm.
Favorite gear ever. I loved that whole look. And then like Liv Morgan doing her like Britney Spears tribute
Yeah.
outfit.
Hmm.
And then like what the big three did on SmackDown, Naomi, Jade, and Bianca in their tribute to the USA Gymnastics women's team. I just feel like there's so much influence in real life that gear should never be boring. Like you could draw inspiration from anywhere. So I do love looking at all of that in wrestling.
In your expert opinion, who do you think are some of the best dressed in wrestling currently?
Best dressed. The first that come to mind, Ricky Starks. I think he just always
Hmm.
looks so dapper. His
Yes.
clothes, and I think the difference with Ricky Starks is that his clothes always fit him well. He's
Yes.
always
He
like,
has a tailor for
yes,
sure.
yes. Some people need to look up a tailor. I I also just mentioned Daniel Garcia. I love his outfits. I think Jade Cargill always looks rich and expensive. But Chelsea Green, oh my God, she kills me every time. I think every look that she puts together, I'm so obsessed with. Like, I genuinely don't think anyone is really as well dressed as Chelsea Green is. But I also feel like it's because her outfits feel so authentic to her as a person. It doesn't feel like she's putting on a cosplay of like a hot girl. She is just a hot girl. So
Right.
those are probably like my favorite dressed wrestlers currently.
I gotta give it up for Ethan Page. I
Oh
had
my
tweeted
God,
him the
yeah,
other day, call
forget.
him rich because he be dressing. I don't know what it is, but him transitioning from AEW, and he dressed nice in AEW, don't get me wrong, but like that transition to NXT has been amazing. I don't know where he's going now, but he can dress.
Yeah, no, it looks well put together. He also looks
Yes.
so rich and expensive.
I'm telling you, the tailoring makes a difference. It really
Yeah,
does.
it makes
And
it
knowing how
makes
to
it
dress
huge.
your body.
Mm-hmm. Because and that's the thing, right? Is that like I could put on an outfit. If someone tries to put on that exact same outfit, it might not look the same on them because it might not fit their vibe. It might not fit their body or whatever. You know, I feel like it's so important to like know what suits you as an individual, and it's what makes an outfit, I think.
Right. Let's talk about how to incorporate fashion into a wrestling show or a convention look. What are some of your favorite pieces to incorporate into your own looks?
Man, I love putting together outfits for wrestling shows. Like me and the girls have our group chat like ready to go. For me, and I think this is kind of touching on what we just discussed about like personal style. It's so important, I think, to have when you're thinking of putting together an outfit for a wrestling show. The way that I dress in real life is very similar to how I dress at a wrestling show. WrestleMania 41, I wore pumps night 2 and I wore like 5-inch platforms night 1. But those are pieces that I wear in my real life. Like that's how I dress normally. Like when I go out to like dinner or when I go out to like the bars or whatever, like that's how I dress. So to me, I have my formulas. I know what looks good on me. I know what looks good and like what complements my personal style. So really when it comes to what I'm wearing for a wrestling show, I take that same formula. I just swap out the shirt for like a wrestling shirt maybe. But my favorite piece to wear is my WWF vintage racing jacket.
I knew it.
It's so good. It's a conversation starter. I think it's just so cool. So I've worn it so many times already this year. I wore it night 1 of WrestleMania, and I wore it to West Coast Pro not too long ago. I wore it, I think, to like a concert with my friends. So it is like one of my favorite wrestling pieces.
And did you thrift that?
It was sourced online on Mercari. So she was a little expensive, but it was worth it.
How long did it take you to find it? Were you kind of just browsing Mercari and you found it, or was it a piece that you had on your wish list?
A little bit of both. When Bad Bunny wore the WWF jacket, and I was like, damn, I want one. So for months, it was just something that I was like on the hunt for. And yeah, found it, fell into my lap, and it's my favorite piece.
Do you have any pieces or items that you would like to incorporate into future looks? Maybe something you have on your wish list that you're on the lookout for?
I'm chronically online. As someone who has like a real life too, I'm also chronically online. And one of my favorite looks right now that the girls are doing is like the really big like jerseys with like mini skirts or like baggy jeans. I love that look. I would love to find like a John Cena jersey.
Oh, yes.
And like style it in that similar way. So that's probably going to be like on my next hunt for. And I don't mean to say this because I'm talking to you right now, but I've been trying to find a way to, or find an event to wear the Wrestling Nitro Baddies hat.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so I bought that a few weeks ago from Wrestling Winedown, and I've been trying to find like an event to wear that too.
What advice would you give to a woman looking to enter the luxury e-commerce field?
So I guess with this advice, this honestly is probably for someone who already has their foot in the door, but I think this advice applies to anyone in any situation. My number one advice is just to make genuine connections everywhere you go. I think meeting people and having good relationships with people is such a fire way to like spread your information, get your name out there, especially, and I say that specifically in this question because the e-commerce world is so small. I have colleagues that work all over this industry. I feel like if I were to move to LA or if I moved to New York, if I moved to Vegas, I feel like I could reach out to somebody and say like, hey, are you guys hiring? And I would have a job reference there. So I think, but you also have to be good at what you do too. too, because
Totally.
people can't go to bat for you if you don't have the skills to back it up. So, if you know that you are good at whatever it is that you do, whether it is authenticating or if it's styling or if it is like in merchandising, build those connections because this industry is so small. If you have a reputation that precedes you in a positive way, use that to your advantage. Use that to get yourself into rooms, into interviews, into events where you can meet even more people. So yeah, I think number one advice is just build genuine connections wherever it is that you go. It is going to take you places. The second piece of advice, and again, I think this also relates to anything in life, but be open to humility, be open to knowing when you're wrong. Again, in this industry specifically, the replica industry is constantly changing. Every year, I feel like replicas, fakes get better and better and better. Again, sometimes I see something and I'm like, I don't see a difference between this and this. So being able to have that sense of humility and know like, oh, okay, maybe I was wrong. Maybe that isn't real, or maybe that is fake. I think that is so important to be able to say that you're wrong. I said earlier, if you're the smartest person in the room, you are in the wrong room. Same thing stands here. Doing authentication specifically is such a collaborative effort. If you are shutting people down, if you're not willing to hear why someone is thinking something's fake, you're going to continuously be wrong and you're not going to expand your knowledge either. So if you're the smartest person in the room, get out, find a new room, and find people that you can learn from. So those would be my two pieces of advice for anyone trying to get into this industry, but also that can be used anywhere else in real life.
Thank you, Vanessa, so much for joining me here on Wrestling Winedown. Where can the people keep up with you on social media?
On Twitter, Vanessa from SF. On Instagram, Vanessa de Alba, but I am on private, so maybe I'll let you in.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Wrestling Winedown. You can find all of our other episodes available wherever you listen to your podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, and iHeartRadio. We are on Twitter and Instagram at WWDCAST. We also have our official merch store, which you can find at shop.wrestlingwinedownlv.com. Let us know what you thought about this episode. What was your favorite part? Until next time, enjoy your wine and, of course, enjoy your wrestling. Cheers!